Open the pod bay doors, please, Hal.
There it is. Welcome to Jurassic Park.
We've made living biological attractions so astounding that they'll capture the imagination of the entire planet.
The most phenomenal discovery of our time.
How'd you do this?
Becomes the greatest adventure of all time.
Can I touch it?
Sure.
Universal Pictures presents
You feel that?
Hold on to your butts.
a Steven Spielberg film.
Fences are failing all over the park.
Yeah, that's nice. Gotta go.
An adventure.
Look out! Down!
I can't get Jurassic Park back online.
65 million years in the making. Jurassic Park.
The pod bay doors are open. I'm Jerry Dean Roberts of ArmchairCinema.com. Welcome to the Pod Bay Doors podcast. And you are?
I am Doug Heller, film critic and historian for TalkMovieToMe.com. And today we're going to be talking about Jurassic Park. Jerry, this was your pick, so I'm going to let you kind of take the floor here for a minute.
Yeah, this is not the first time we've talked about this. Doug and I have talked about this many times, at least twice. And it was kind of one of the inspirations for this podcast. If you don't know, we have another podcast called The Cave of Wonders. And it's officially called The Cave of Wonders Podcast with Doug and Jerry, in which we talk about Disney movies.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of wanted to break out of that box. And so here we are talking about this, and I just really had the itch to talk about Jurassic Park, mostly because I saw it again the other night.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you would call it this, but would you call it a game changer?
Absolutely, at least in terms of special effects and how effects were integrated and used in the advancement of computer-generated effects. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and the only way I can really think about this is, and this show is aimed mostly at millennials, because I want you to understand what a monumental effort this was.
Mm-hmm.
Because what had come before this, CG effects had come in bits.
Yeah.
They had come in small bites. There was and if you've ever seen any special on visual effects, you've seen it. There's an old Listerine commercial where there's a Listerine bottle and it's swinging a sword around, and it's all computer generated.
Mm-hmm.
And
I remember
really
that one.
Yeah, that really, it's probably on YouTube somewhere. That really was the beginning of a spiral. But in movies, it was used very sparsely up until this point. And you have to understand, between 92 and 93, what a monumental jump this was. Because these dinosaurs were not just on the screen. They looked like living, breathing creatures.
Yeah, they did.
They were on the screen early and often.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to overestimate how incredible this movie was when it first came out. On television, but it doesn't have you can't get that. It's like people say about Star Wars. You can't get the same impact on television that you got in the theater.
Right.
Going to see this in that summer.
Yeah. I mean, it's not just the digital effects, but the puppeteering too, because they did a really seamless blend of digital effects and Phil Tippett's puppets, because you could see like the animatronic ones when the T-Rex leans its head down and the flashlight hits its eye and the pupil constricts, and the Triceratops, the sick Triceratops, that they're on was an animatronic.
or even the baby.
Yeah, the little baby raptor.
The baby raptor.
Mm-hmm.
And not only how amazing it was then, but how amazing it still is. Because you and I just saw this in preparation for this.
Yeah.
And we're still amazed by how good it looks.
It's still awe-inspiring. It's incredible how these effects have stood up. Whereas you watch something from, 5-10 years ago, and the digital effects look dated. This doesn't. This could have been made 2 years ago.
Which is interesting because Spielberg's effects always hold up. They hold up more than anybody else.
They do.
The effects in Spielberg's film.
They do.
You go back to Close Encounters. That was all model work.
Yeah.
And of course it was at night, but it all still looks incredible.
It does.
Go back to Jaws. Even as faulty as the shark was in Jaws, it still looks incredible.
It does.
When you see it. The only time I think the effects start to get dated is probably in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Because that's where they still use optical effects, and maybe it plays better to that film because it's based on a genre that was kind of low budget and cheap.
Right. But when you see Alfred Molina, the dummy of Alfred Molina on the spike, you know it's a dummy, and when the faces melt, those effects have dated, but they were going for something that would have been very hard to make realistic even then.
Yeah.
So
nowadays they would have done it all in visual. They would have done it all in the computer.
Right, and it would all look much more horrifying.
Yeah. That would never have gotten past the MPAA.
No.
But if I have only one issue with the visual effects, it's probably, and I'm nitpicking here, but when you see the T-Rex outside in the daylight, it does look a little. You can see the lines.
You can still see some matte lines. Yeah, that's true. But you could see matte lines and transparencies through the physical sets in Star Wars too. Empire Strikes Back, when they were doing the battle on Hoth, to optically put the snowspeeder cockpit over the blue screen with the AT-ATs, they had to make it a little bit more transparent so you could kind of see the legs through the cockpit metal. Which they've since cleaned up in the special editions and whatnot. But that kind of stuff in bright light has always been problematic, or used to be before they rendered the entire environment digitally. But when they were trying to optically put the computer-generated effects over real scenario, real scenes, real locations, in broad daylight, the matte lines do still tend to come out.
One of the problems that I remember Roger Ebert, Siskel and Ebert had this huge problem with this movie is their basic problem was the dinosaurs outweigh the characters. Which is true. But there was one thing they were talking about. When Spielberg made Jaws, the reason you spent so much time with the characters is because the shark didn't work.
Right.
So he was forced to use the ocean as a villain. Here, the visual effects work. And they kept working.
Right.
And they were fun. And it seemed to go like clockwork. So you get the dinosaurs early and often, which does kind of kill the effect.
Sure.
Because there's very, 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 very little build up to it. I can't. It's hard for me to fault the movie for that, but it does seem to work better when you have a little time to kind of deal with. Because this movie really kind of drops the dinosaurs in their lap, so to speak.
Yeah.
They go to this island. They're not 100% sure why they're there. The paleontologists go to this island. And then they just sort of see them all of a sudden. They drive out in the Jeep and feel, and there they are.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of it's a wondrous scene.
Yes, it is.
But it's like I've seen a dinosaur now. Okay. That's the first, half hour of the movie?
Somewhere in there, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then the rest of it is a monster movie.
Yeah.
And we were talking about how trimmed down this movie was. Now, this is, of course, based on a book by Michael Crichton, who, by the way, in my research, I found out that Universal had optioned this script before Crichton even wrote the book.
Oh, wow.
And he got, I think, $500,000 just for adapting it.
Wow.
And I'm glad he did the way he did, because if he had tried to just copy the book, the movie wouldn't have worked.
No.
Because I don't know if you know Crichton, but he's dead now, of course. He was extremely technical.
Very, very much so.
He would spend pages and pages and pages just dealing with technical stuff. I remember reading Airframe, and there's a whole quarter of the book at the beginning just talking about how they investigate airplane crashes.
Right, and
find the right box and things like
you
that.
know, I read The Andromeda Strain, and I'm going along, and about halfway through, he decides to take about a 15-page break from characters, everything, and tell you what the scientific definition of a problem is. 15 pages, 20 pages maybe at the most. So I kind of skipped that and looked for a character's name, and once I found the first character name, I picked up, and that's where the story picked up. It was this insignificant little thing that he felt the need to devote 15 full pages to.
Listen, if you think Stephen King takes diversions, if you think Stephen King takes side roads, he's nothing compared to Michael Crichton did. I mean,
no.
Crichton
Because,
would go off.
Oh my God! Like the Terminal Man is at least half just how electrodes in the brain would work. Congo is, well, that's a chore in both book and movie form, but and Sphere. I hated that movie so much I didn't even want to bother read the book.
It was such a bad movie because it was such a complex and complicated book that nobody could have adapted it.
Well, that, and who makes Dustin Hoffman an action star?
Yeah.
I mean, outside of Straw Dogs. But
well, and that movie really had common sense issues.
Yeah.
What happens if Jerry gets mad? Well, why don't you ask Jerry? You know?
Yeah.
Just an idea. But going back, but with Jurassic Park, I remember the book was all of this stuff at the beginning of the book was all of this competition going on between these different agencies, all these things going on in various islands in the South Pacific.
No, it's off Costa Rica.
Off Costa Rica. All these
so
Costa
it's
Rican
Central
islands,
America.
and all of these things going on, and all of this long before we even get to the characters.
Mm-hmm.
There's a scene in the book that never would have made it in the movie where the raptors get aboard a ship and they end up in a Costa Rican town.
Mm-hmm.
And they're eating babies.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I mean, it gets dark, really dark.
Yes, it does.
And but there was just so much, and also there's this whole thing about there's this other agency that's in competition with Hammond or in competition with Engine that wants to steal the embryos, which is where Nedry comes in.
Mm-hmm.
The movie doesn't explain that too much.
It's like a throwaway line and a throwaway scene.
Yeah.
that's purely exposition, but it kind of needed to be there. Like the book, I read the book once many years ago after I'd seen the movie a few times. The book has higher stakes, but it also has higher reactions. Whereas the movie, they Crichton and not co-screenwriter, but co-screenwriter, they didn't write it together, but David Koepp took the final pass at the script after Crichton had done a draft or a few drafts, and they kind of localized it. They made the threat more immediate instead of a global thing, which is kind of what they tried to do with Jurassic Park 2, that the animals were starting to try to get off the island, and 3, I think, was the bigger one that they were kind of trying to get off the island. But they kind of stripped this down and made it just about this core, what is it, 8 characters, 10 characters?
It's a bottle movie.
Yeah, it is.
And, where you have characters trapped in one location and they have to
Right.
get out of it.
To explain
So-
that actually comes from an episode of Star Trek where they do these things called bottle episodes. They used to be called ship in a bottle episodes, where they would just take the core cast so that they wouldn't have to pay extras, and they do one location so that they didn't have to do a whole lot, spend a whole lot, so that they could use that budget on a larger, usually like the season finale or something like that, so that they could conserve their budget, so that they could spend it elsewhere on a grander thing, like a season finale or a more a grander episode.
So that it applies to this film simply because you have people trapped on an island that can't get out,
Mm-hmm.
and they're stuck there with man-eating dinosaurs.
Yeah.
It's a very simplified version of the book.
Yeah.
And I'm glad, because if it had been, it would have been all over the place. And plus, Michael Crichton wrote really unlikable characters.
Typically,
Hammond
yeah.
in the book was a wimp. He was in complete, insane, pathological denial of it, that there was anything wrong. And he ends up getting eaten by those little
Compies. Yeah. They don't show up in the first movie. They show up in the second or the third movie.
They're the ones that attack that little girl.
Yeah.
Also, I think that Malcolm to me is the best character in the movie.
Yeah, he is.
But if you think he was sermonizing too much in this series. In the book, it was even worse. I mean,
Yeah.
it
went
gets
on
your
for
nerve.
it went on for pages in the book.
It's like being stuck on an island with Sheldon Cooper. I mean, it's just completely just on and on and on and on. I told you so. I told you so. I told you so. Shut up. But the fact that Jeff Goldblum is in the role is really great, because we like Jeff Goldblum even when he is sermonized.
Yes.
Maybe you can explain this a little better, but why was he there?
I don't know. The lawyer. The lawyer brought him as an outside. He's a respected scientist, mathematician, whatever. I guess the lawyers liked, or the investors knew of him. I guess he's about as famous as a mathematician can be. I don't really know what that means, though, because I mean, name a mathematician that's not Albert Einstein or Stephen Hawking, or what is it, Nash, whatever his name is, Nash from the Beautiful Mind was based on. And you only know about him unless you took economics classes because of A Beautiful Mind, or Alan Turing. So there's like 4 or 5 very famous mathematicians, and that's about it. So I guess he's maybe, because he was at the front of chaos theory, that was getting some notoriety in this universe's press, that things are going to fall apart, and he's one of those that's out there on whatever, the National Geographic or whatever, doing television shows and writing books about how you can't predict anything. The only constant is unpredictability or something like that. That's the only thing I can figure, but they never really go into that. They're just like, he's a mathematician and he's a personality, and that's about all you get.
The whole dinner table scene at the beginning of this movie, which for some reason is lit with spotlights, I have no idea why, but the whole this whole movie is some of it is lit with spotlights. But that whole dinner scene where they're all telling John how wrong he was for even doing this, or they're all giving their objections. It's all kind of, like what did you expect?
Yeah.
Kind of thing. Like, you have to be careful. You can't play God. That kind of thing. And there's this whole thing about, it's something that Jeff Goldblum says, like, or was it Jeff Goldblum? No, it was Laura Dern says, these are live, aggressive creatures. They have no idea what century they're in.
Mm-hmm.
Which puts you in mind of how are they going to adapt to the environment now as opposed to when they lived? How are they going to deal with the vegetation and eating, all of that stuff?
The air.
And the air, the atmosphere, all of that stuff. How are they going to deal with all of that? And you're thinking to yourself, why didn't Hammond and his engineers ever think of any of this? We thought about it. Well, we can do it.
Right.
But we didn't think about the implications of it.
And that really leads into Jeff Goldblum when he says, or Ian Malcolm, I say, when he says, you were so preoccupied with the notion of whether or not you could, you never stopped to think about whether or not you should.
Right. Right.
And because our atmosphere is completely different because of all of the, post-industrial revolution, I don't think those dinosaurs would have been able to breathe without having evolved through that time frame, Well,
let's talk about the dinosaurs themselves, because something that we had talked about before,
right.
And I talked about off mic. This whole idea of what Hammond does when he takes them through this, what does he call it? He calls it a ride.
Yeah, it's sort of a ride.
When he says, when Mr. DNA starts giving the in-depth analysis of how they were created through blood taken from a mosquito that had been trapped in tree sap.
Right.
And
fossilized in amber.
Right. And the sequencing that he's talking about, we had to fill in the sequencing gaps and all of this. You would not have had a dinosaur.
No.
And first of all, in order for it to become a living organism, the sequencing, or a sustainable living organism, you would have had about a 1 in trillion chances that you would have ever gotten a dinosaur out of it.
Yes, because to kind of break it down, anybody that's has a basic knowledge of genetics and genetic engineering would be able to figure this out. Any time you take decomposing matter, the genetic sequence is still there, but over time it breaks down. So there are gaps, so that what you have, if you tried to synthesize it from that, it would be incomplete. You wouldn't be able to get anything out of it. So they say that they fill in these sequence gaps with the DNA of a tree frog, which is an amphibian, which is not even the same species as a dinosaur.
Right.
Which holds more in common. And the theory that they evolved into birds is actually one of the best scientific things that came out of this. Theories that came out of this, because it was a little known theory at the time that has since gained a whole lot of traction, and it makes more sense because they're endothermic. That means they hold their body temperature. They were warm-blooded. They weren't cold-blooded like lizards. They lay eggs, but they walked around like birds. They weren't lizards. They weren't amphibians. They were dinosaurs. They were their own thing. So when you introduce this foreign genetic material into it, depending on how big the gaps are, which 65 million years at the least of this, blood being fossilized in amber, it's probably going to be a lot. There's probably not a whole lot of genetic material from the dinosaur even left. So to get these perfect representations of all these different kinds, and the fact that they found blood of all these different kinds of dinosaurs when they hadn't even thought of it before in the first place, it really bends it really puts the suspension of disbelief to the test. And I think that
go with it.
Yeah, the spectacle of it overrides how wrong it is. And it's kind of good.
It's still a heck of a movie. I mean, even if the genetics are kind of,
wobbly.
Even if the genetics are kind of fuzzy, but still, it is a heck of a movie despite that.
It's a whole lot of fun,
really.
And I loved. I've always loved the picture, and I've mentioned this on both of our attempts at recording this that ended up being mired in technical difficulties.
This is the third time we've talked about this, by the way.
But due to technical complications, we weren't able to get it posted. But I'm going to bring this up because I brought this up 2 other times, and my primary gripe with this movie is topography. I can deal with it being movie logic in getting the genetics right. I can deal with some of that other stuff, but the way that they shot some of the scenes and the way that they arranged the topography of the shots versus what the distance between things actually were. My main gripe is this. When they drive up to the dinosaur paddock in their electric Jeeps on the tracks, the power kind of goes, the trucks stop, the Jeeps stop, and they're sitting there waiting. And they're like, okay, well, let's tempt it out. And even with, it's probably about a 3 or 4 foot drop from the base of the fence down to the ground. And this goat comes up, lowered up from underneath, which means that there's a series of tunnels underneath where they can load a goat in and raise this thing up. So it's kind of even on a false floor, right?
Yeah.
And then the power goes out all the way. The T-Rex comes up. The goat is gone. They can see the goat. The T-Rex, you see it. It cries out, and then it takes down the fencing and steps out over the concrete base of the fence. Comes out. It's causing all this havoc. Eventually, it eats Gennaro, the lawyer. It throws Malcolm. Then Sam Neill, Dr. Grant, grabs Lex, and he's like, "Don't move. It can't do anything if it can't see you if you don't move," which is another scientific ridiculousness that I won't get into. Vision based on movement is just pure nonsense.
We're trying not to gripe too much.
So that's like a gripe within a gripe. So it's like the cherry-filled center of a gripe. So the T-Rex, she pushes the Jeep, and Lex and Dr. Grant go along with it along the side, and now they're pinned up to the base of the fencing, the concrete base. They get up on top of that, and then they grab one of the electrical wires, and suddenly there's a 20 or 30 foot cliff underneath them that wasn't there 5 minutes prior.
Basically, the T-Rex steps over the cement causeway into the road, where he attacks the truck. And then later, when they go over it, it's not flat. It's instead a 30-foot drop of the tree in it.
Right. It doesn't make any sense. And when you're watching it, it doesn't dawn on you that that's not how it was 5 minutes before.
Because it's such a sustained action scene.
Right.
It goes from one thing to another, and it goes on and on and on and on and on.
I have to.
Because you go.
Have to give credit to Spielberg for that.
From the T-Rex to the attack to going over the cliff down the tree, it just goes on and on and on.
Right. It's relentless.
He's the master of sustained action scenes.
Yes.
And because I get the one movie that I can really point to that is the opposite of this is the Godzilla movie from a couple of years ago. That the one with Bryan Cranston. That
Gareth Edwards directed.
Who directed
Rogue One.
Rogue One.
Mm-hmm.
You would have Godzilla in the middle of town fighting these Mutos. And they would face off, and they would start fighting, and then the scene would end. You would not have a fight. It would just get started, and then it would just cut to something else. That's not the problem. That's not a problem here.
No.
Because Spielberg knows how, and his creative team know how to sustain the action. That's why this movie works so well.
Right.
The kitchen scene, for example.
Oh.
All of that. It just goes on and on and on. So you're invested.
Yeah.
You've got time.
And you can ignore that when Lex gets into that shelf at the end of the counter, and she's trying to pull the thing down, and her reflection is showing that her reflection is not opposite her. It's actually off to the right of her. Or it's off to the left of her. It's weird projecting so that it can be in the middle of the aisle, but she's off on under one of the counters. You can forgive all that because it's such a tense.
Well, when you were talking about the topography, I was thinking because we had talked about this before. I went back and watched Jurassic Park, and I also went back and watched Jurassic World. Now, if you think this movie will give you a headache for what you just described, Jurassic World will drive you crazy.
Right, because it like quadruples the size of the island. First of all.
Yeah. This island is tiny, and it's like in Jurassic World, it's almost like it's on a different side of the island. But no, we were all over the place in this movie, and then the center is kind of off to the side.
It was
maybe
weird.
Slowed it down. I don't know.
I don't really know. All I know is from that is that it felt like they made the island bigger. Yes, they're on the other side of it, and we never saw the whole island. I don't think in Jurassic Park, and the two direct sequels, Lost World Jurassic Park and Jurassic Park 3, both took place on a separate island.
Right.
On Site B. So we never really returned to
Isla Nublar.
Isla Nublar, thank you, yes. Or Nublar, yeah. We never returned to that until Jurassic World. And so we don't really know how big it is, but it felt like they expanded it by like at least fourfold for Jurassic World, and made it enormous when it wasn't that big in the first place. But the other thing was, and we talked about this before, the way that they set it up is like the raptor pen is like right outside the welcome center.
Yeah,
it's like, but
on
it's
the other side.
Yeah, it's not, but it feels like the way that they're like, oh, you have raptors, and they go right from the visitor center straight out to the raptor pen 2 minutes later. Like it's right there, and they keep it close to observe it. I don't know.
Yeah, don't think too much. I don't think they're expecting you to think too much.
That's exactly it.
This is not a movie where this is an action picture.
Mm-hmm.
It's a monster movie. You don't think in monster movies. And
right.
We're both critics, and you can find our work at our website. But one thing that I'm always aware of. I have a philosophy about films. The problems that I have with it, I can forgive if they occur to me after the movie is over.
Yeah.
The problem is if they occur to me while I'm watching it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I take my critical analysis.
Right.
If I'm thinking about it afterwards and it occurs to me, I'm like, well, I can forgive imperfection.
But if you're sitting there and you go, wait, right when it happens, that's troublesome, because they should have thought of that when they were writing it and making it.
I can't deal with Superman 4 where Margot Hemingway gets drug out into space without a spacesuit on.
There's no reason to try to deal with There's no reason to try to deal with Superman 4 anyway.
I'm just using that as an example. It's like that's where I'm like, well, wait a minute, wait, hold on, and then I have to back up, and it takes me a minute to catch up because the movie is making such a glaring error. Here they don't make those kinds of glaring errors. They only make errors that occur to you when it's over.
Yeah.
And I'm okay with that. That's why I love this movie. Even if I can pick it apart, I still love it.
Sure.
It's like that whole thing with Raiders of the Lost Ark we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
There's that whole thing about the script basically doesn't need Indiana Jones to end up like it does.
Pretty much,
because
yeah.
It basically would have ended up the exact same way, even if Indy didn't, wasn't involved. I can forgive that.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
But here, one of the problems I have, I'm going to move on. I'm going to move back to the technical side again. Is that I have trouble watching this, and I wanted to mention I have trouble watching this on television.
Right.
This is a movie experience. It's not a television experience. You really cannot get the full impact of this film unless you see it in a theater with a crowd of people, as we did.
Right. It gets muted.
When I saw this in '93, I was 22, maybe, when it came out, and I remember when I went in, because this was such a technological breakthrough. Not just in the visual effects, but also in the sound. Because when I went to the theater to see this, you got a little yellow card with the Jurassic Park logo on it. And I wish I still had it, but it said something like, you are about to experience Jurassic Park in a new digital sound. And when you went in, you had speakers. First of all, the sound was as clear as a bell. I mean, it was perfect. You had sound that came from behind you. You had sound that came in front of you, and just off to the sides. So you had the dinosaurs in one speaker, the bugs in another speaker, and the voices in another one. So it was a sensory experience. Right.
The way that they mixed it for the I guess the burgeoning DTS sound was really incredible. The sound design, in my mind, I don't notice sound all that much unless it's really terrible or really inventive. With the age that we are in now, and that I grew up in, the video age and DVDs and now streaming and Blu-rays, without a surround sound system in your house, you're getting the stuff right from your television, from your front speakers. And even when you go into a movie theater, most of the sound design is just loud all the way around. It's not nuanced. Like, this had different sounds in different tracks and channels and speakers, a lot in the same way that later in 2010 Darren Aronofsky did with Black Swan, which, if you saw that in the theater, if you sat in the right spot, you could hear the voices that she heard behind you while there was music coming out of a front channel, while there was somebody talking to her in the left channel, and her own voices in her head coming from a back channel. It was the way that it was mixed was quite different from most other movies except Jurassic Park.
Yeah, I don't notice it. I don't notice it either unless it's really pronounced, like it was in Jurassic Park, where the sounds are separate,
Mm-hmm.
and where because you hear things separately.
Yeah.
You all hear things separately, and so it's trying to create that kind of that kind of.
It's trying to put you there, in the middle of it.
And I'm really ashamed to admit that I saw this in a theater, but when I saw An American Werewolf in Paris.
I saw that in the theater too. I'm sorry to say.
The movie is god awful.
Oh, it's horrible.
But the way the speakers were set up, there's a scene where the main character, is talking, and there's a fly buzzing around, and the fly moves from this speaker to that speaker to this speaker to that speaker. And it was like buzzing around, and it was kind of a fascinating effect. And so it felt like it was moving around the room. It felt like it was moving around you, like it was moving around the character.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the stuff I noticed. You put me you have me, if I were a member of the Academy and you put me voting for that sound, I wouldn't know what to listen for.
Right.
I'd vote for I'd do what they do. I'd vote for the loudest movie. But anyway, it was trying to be a new experience, and it was.
Mm-hmm. It was.
It really was. But I will say this: Spielberg is my favorite director. He's my favorite living director. That's just me. I love Scorsese as well, but Spielberg is just the one that I always look forward to. This was the last of his really fun movies, and you have to separate his work between the entertainment and the serious stuff. This came out the same year as Schindler's List.
6 months prior. 6 or 7 months prior.
List, yeah. This came out in June, and Schindler's List came out in mid-December.
Right.
And you really have to separate his films between what is entertainment and what is serious. And I have felt like ever since, how long has it been since this movie? 25 years, something like that?
24, yeah.
His films have leaned more heavily on the serious stuff.
Yeah.
And his
Post Schindler's List. Yeah.
Post Schindler's List have suffered for it.
Mm-hmm.
The first entertainment film he made after this was Lost World, which he didn't want to make.
No.
And he's not good with sequels. And he's never made a completely successful sequel, in my opinion. But
Last Crusade, for me, personally.
Last Crusade was fun. Even though I still have my issues with it, but it's always I think this was the last really great fun movie that Spielberg made, and I really wanted to make at least one more great fun movie. Because his other entertainments have been really dark.
Yeah.
War of the Worlds, Minority Report, all of that. They were very dark.
Yeah.
And AI.
I think Catch Me If You Can, despite its problems, was a very entertaining, fun, light movie, and so was The Terminal.
They felt like a Grand Day Out, but
they were not They weren't adventures. They were comedies. So I think that's his adventures have taken a much more serious track. Even Bridge of Spies, which was a really good movie, has elements of comedy, elements of suspense, but ultimately it was a drama. He hasn't really made a light action movie. If it's light, it's a very light, fluff, minor piece comedy, or his action ones are Minority Report or War of the Worlds.
They're trying to say something.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Jurassic Park's trying to say something too. The whole playing God thing.
Right.
But I can't fault Spielberg because of what he's given me. Spielberg essentially, I feel, gave me a part of my childhood. I was lucky to grow up in my formative years in the era when Jaws and Close Encounters and E.T. and Jurassic Park and Raiders of the Lost Ark and Poltergeist all came out. So I thank him for giving me those films in my childhood.
Right. And while I was not, I'm 10 years younger than you, so any time you were, I was 12 when this came out, so this is formative entertainment for me. And of course, E.T. was always on video when I was growing up, and Raiders was on television, and I don't think I saw Jaws or Close Encounters until I was in high school, but they're kind of ubiquitous to growing up, and I've since shown all of them except Close Encounters. I haven't gotten to Close Encounters, showing it to my son, but he loves all of them. He loves Jaws. He actively requests seeing Raiders of the Lost Ark. I took him to see Jurassic Park in the theater when they re-released it in 3D. Which was pointless, but it was great to see it in the theater again.
I tried to encourage everybody to see it. The younger people who were not old enough, I tried to encourage everybody to see it when it came back out.
Yeah. So
because I wanted them to have the experience that I did. And the same thing when Raiders of the Lost Ark came back out.
Yeah.
I tried to encourage, please go see it in the theater because it's a different experience.
I regrettably missed that, but I did get to take him to see E.T. in the theater, which was the first time I'd seen it in the theater too.
I'm going to be honest, I love E.T., but it meant more to me when I was 10.
Well, I'll admit to this. I didn't actually see E.T. from beginning to end until I was 17 or 18 years old.
I was 10 years old.
It was out in 82. I remember it being on at a couple of birthday parties, but I didn't see it when I was a kid. Somehow I was the only person on Earth my age to not see that movie when it was on video. Everybody else grew up with it. I didn't see it until I was in high school. So it was a different resonance for me, and I loved it. And I've since taken Charlie to see it in the theater. Actually, my wife and Charlie and I all got to go see it in the theater when TCM presented it a few years ago. And it was funny because I had it on video, or I think I had just gotten it on Blu-ray anyway. And we left the theater, and my son says, "Can we go home and watch that again?" And I was like, "Yes, we can." So,
which Spielberg movie do you think you've seen the most?
It might very well be Jurassic Park, because I was 12 when it came out. I saw it in the theater, bought it on video, played it an awful lot. But in intervening years since then, it's probably Raiders.
I probably, because they were on so much when I was a kid, probably Jaws, Close Encounters, and Raiders. Raiders I've seen so many times that I can quote it verbatim. Not just in the dialogue, but in the style of the dialogue.
Yeah.
I've seen it that many times. Because it was just on, and it was around. It was one of the first videotapes we ever bought.
Oh, okay.
So it was around, but like I say, Spielberg. You said in our first episode on our Cave of Wonders, Disney makes childhood. I think Spielberg may have helped to make mine.
It's true.
His career was beginning when I was beginning to understand what a movie was.
Right.
So that's one of the reasons I really wanted to talk about this, because it's a troubling experience as a critic, but as a moviegoer, it's a lot of fun.
It is. It really is.
As I said, and I'm going to leave us at my final note on this is I'm going to leave and say I hope that before he leaves this earth or before he retires, I hope that we get one more experience like this again.
Right. And my final thoughts. I've loved this movie since it came out, and I'll continue loving it despite my problems with it. It's a supreme entertainment and a total blast, and it's so much fun to see Jeff Goldblum doing basically the beginning of his 90s shtick of being right and knowing how to fix the problem, which came to its ultimate conclusion in Independence Day 3 years later.
Goldblum.
But what you have here, you have to and I'll never forget one of his first roles was in Woody Allen's Annie Hall, and you see him on a telephone, and he says, I forgot my mantra. That was his only line. But he was great.
What would the movies be without Goldblum? I mean, he can make a bad movie better.
Like The Fly.
I didn't much care. Well, The Fly was a great movie. I didn't much care for the Independence Day sequel, but if Goldblum had been in it, I think it would have been a complete washout.
Absolutely. So yeah, seeing all of it is fun. It's a great experience. And as long as you're willing to let the logic of it wash past you, it's a spectacular time. So
Don't
I think
about it. It's not a thinking movie.
So at that, I'll say that we'll leave it there. We thank you very much for tuning in and listening to us. If you have any recommendations for movies that you'd like us to talk about, leave them in the comments. We encourage you to leave positive feedback and positive likes and stars and all of that. You can let us know through the comments what you think. We very much appreciate everything. And the pod bay doors are now closed.
Mission has been completed.